and we will get started. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for addressing learning differences through remote learning part 2. This is part of a series of remote learning support webinars provided by the Department of Public Instruction and the Friday Institute for Educational Innovation at NC State University. That's where Alex and I are from, and we're going to be with you today. This is, I believe, the second version of this webinar. I believe it is 26th on our list of webinars that we've done so far. If you have not seen part 1 yet, we're going to do a quick catch up today, but all of the documents and all of the recordings for all of these webinars are going to be made available, and we'll share that link with you in just a moment. So again, my name is Mark Sandberg. I'm the Director of Technology Programs here at the Friday Institute at NC State, and I'm joined today by Alex Dreyer, who is our Instructional Design Lead. We're going to be your facilitators for today. Brittany Miller, who is not able to be with us today, was also instrumental in helping design this webinar for you, as was Marianne Wolf, our Senior Director of Professional Learning Programs. So that is the team who's responsible for this webinar. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time if you have questions after this webinar. This webinar is created through the Professional Learning and Leading Collaborative at the Friday Institute, which is a team of professional learning specialists who work to create professional learning experiences both online and face-to-face, primarily in North Carolina, but also nationally and internationally through our online courses and some of our cohort programs. So we're going to put all of our links in the chat today, and Zoom has finally done the work of making our links clickable again, which is fantastic because you'll be able to click on these links and open them up. So everything that we're going to talk about today, a copy of our slide deck, recordings for these sessions, and all of the other sessions are available at this URL, which Alex is going to put in the chat. And Alex, you do have to put HTTP or it won't make it clickable. So again, everything there is, you can click on that link and pull that up and register for the future webinars. We've got about 2 weeks left in the series, and then you can see any of our past webinars as well. You'll see at the bottom of the screen, we are doing live captioning of the webinars. Live captioning is not 100% accurate, but it does allow people who need that support to access these webinars as well. We are going back and completely human captioning all of these webinars after the fact so that we can get accurate captions on all of them. So it does take us a few days to get the recordings posted after the webinar because we have to have them captioned. So 2 things to say is number 1 is the webinar may not be available for a couple of days, and number 2 is because these are machine captions, they can get it wrong in some pretty interesting ways, so please bear with us on that. If you've not used Zoom before, here's a screen that gives you some of the basic features of Zoom. You'll see video for participants and speakers across the top. You can double click on the presentation window to get out of full screen if you need to. You can mute and unmute as you need to with the question and with the mute button at the bottom. And then we'll be doing a lot of back channel chat in the support as well. So you can ask for questions in the chat. You can answer questions in the chat and then use that as needed. So let's start with a poll, which is which type of weather describes how you are feeling about virtual learning right now? So you should see it pop up on your screen and be able to answer from there. So go ahead and take a minute and answer. And there's one that's been a clear winner the last couple of times we've done this. I don't know, Alex, if you've done this in your other webinar also.
Mm-hmm. Yep, we've had, for our previous poll and for this one, a pretty clear winner, but again, ideally, you'd love to see these percentages start to level off a little bit. Though, to be fair, you do not want tornado to dominate.
Yes. So I'm gonna go ahead, and if you've not answered, go ahead and take another second and answer. And it looks like, all right, so we'll go ahead and end this. So we've had some pretty consistent results. Claudia is the clear winner, which again is I, I hope we can get more sunnies by the end of the day, but it's better than tornadoes. So we are moving along, and I think the answers are better than when we first started. We did movies back then, and it was Fast and Furious. Was everybody who was answering they felt like Fast and Furious. So hopefully we're leveling out a little bit and getting to a better place, but we still have a lot to do. So
yeah, and hopefully, Mark, that the cloudiness represents that just rained. Now it's a little overcast, and perhaps there could be a break. It's like, we don't know. On the optimistic side, but who knows?
Exactly. So everything we're going to be talking about today is rooted in these instructional design principles for remote learning. These are available on that page that we shared with you earlier. So the Friday Institute and DPI have come up with 7 design principles for remote teaching and learning. Primarily around social and emotional learning and making sure that students' social and emotional needs are met, that we're effectively using instructional time, which does not mean scheduling every minute of every day, but creating instructional time that is reflective of the situation we're in, the needs of our students, and how we are working with our students, but not this rigorous scheduling of every minute of every day. So that's an important clarification that I want to make from the outset. That we're maintaining active connections with our students and families, that we're providing engaging activities that are aligned to standards, but also are reflective of choice and flexibility with a focus on equity and making sure that all students, regardless of where they live or the access to technology that they have, are receiving high quality instruction that meets their needs. That teachers are providing feedback on student work and promoting, where possible, collaboration among students. So our content in our webinar today will talk about this in this learning differences context, but also these are broader principles for all remote learning. So today's focus is on supporting all learners, and we're going to start with a quick overview of universal design for learning, talk about students' social and emotional needs, and talk about also pursuing equity in instructional design. So I want to start with a quick review of learning differences, and I'm going to pass it to Alex for this. And we are going to pass, even though we're using the same slide deck, we are going to pass presenter control back and forth, because then the captions will be more accurate. So I'm going to ask Alex to share his screen and take over from here for the next part.
Thank you, Mark. So make sure it's off. Good. All right. So when we talk about learning differences, one of the things the first thing we kind of like to address off the bat is that we're not using the phrase learning differences as a quote unquote politically correct way of talking about learning disabilities. Learning differences we think of and is defined as a kind of a broader suite of skills and learning challenges that you might see your students experience, issues like working memory, like attention, like motivation, like executive function. And so research is showing quite a bit that all students now are varied how they learn to some degree. Yet the learning environments that we currently have, they're just not structured to support this variability. They're structured to support a narrow type of learner, and a learner who can learn in particular contexts. And that sort of becomes a reinforcement cycle, because it naturally makes sense that that people who excel in school might want to become teachers, some of whom, right? And those who excelled in this context, teaching this way, it's only going to be natural. You're going to teach the way you were taught, right? So it kind of feeds on itself, totally unintentionally. And and there's certainly no malice involved in any way. But just thinking about, again, what this broader suite of research is showing, and what I think maybe a lot of us intuit from our own learning and from our own lives, is that we all vary a little bit in how we learn. And so the question is, and we've been thinking about this at the Friday Institute for going on 7 years now, at least 6, is how do we really address this gap? How do we address the gap between how students learn and how they're asked to demonstrate and show their learning in the context in which they do so? And so even in a bigger question is, how do we think about addressing this gap at a distance with these learners? And it's not just at a distance. And I think this is something that I'm going to underscore throughout. I think Marco underscored throughout, is that it would be one thing if we had a whole, long on-ramp of years of preparation to be able to switch over to doing this in a remote context. And we had tons of preparation, tons of PD. But we're designing, building, flying the plane all at once. And we're being asked to do all of this right away during a global pandemic, when not only are we struggling to figure out how to work with our own students, we're struggling how to figure out how to manage the new realities of our own lives. So I think it's really important, and I think that the notion of grace should be an undercurrent, if not wrapped around the entire experience, because we really have to give the benefit of the doubt to all of those around us, to our colleagues, to the parents with whom we work, to our students, have the students, create a culture where the students can give that to each other, because without doing that, we're not even going to get close to even working towards addressing this gap. So that's really the big challenge that we're wrestling with right now. And we think about learning differences, again, that more broad, all-encompassing challenge of when you're talking about issues like, again, motivation, executive function, working memory, those sorts of challenges. So when you think about it, again, it has a number of meanings. And they can be, again, to show where that umbrella broadens, you're talking about academic differences, cognitive differences, emotional differences, and social differences. And we'll be getting into the latter two in particular towards the end of this session, where we talk about social and emotional learning and how social and emotional learning challenges can be magnified when you're talking about students who have learning differences. But there are specific strategies that can be used to help mitigate that, to help address it. So again, we want to be clear that this definition is much broader. This isn't just a way of trying to make the word learning disabilities sound different. Those who are learning disabled fall under this broader umbrella of those with learning differences. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that's clear. It will help guide us going forward. I'm going to pass it back to Mark in a second to talk about universal design, because universal design is a key approach for designing a learning environment to narrow that gap. We talked about widening it. This helps narrow that gap, because you're designing benefit, the types of design that you're integrating into your instruction, while they're specifically going to help students who struggle in these areas, they end up helping everyone. Like, the example that I always use is, you have a ramp that you can walk up that are predominantly were designed for supporting those with wheelchairs. But I can't tell you how many times my legs have been tired, or there's one time I sprained my ankle, and I certainly chose to walk up the ramp, and it made it easier for me, even though it wasn't designed for me specifically. So that's something that we want to think about. And I know that Mark has some specific ideas and some specific tools and features of these tools that could blow your mind a little bit. I know they did mine. So Mark, you have the floor. I think you're muted at the moment.
I am muted. So I want to start with a question as we move into talking about universal design for learning, which is, when you see the word accessibility, especially in a technical context, what are the things that come to your mind? What do you think of? So go ahead and respond in the chat. Available in many ways, easy to access, available for everyone, equity for all, equal access. All right. So in a technical context, design with intentionality, I really like that. We're going to talk a lot about that today. Everyone can access regardless of disability. So when we talk about accessibility in technical context, what we're talking about is the purposeful design of a technology tool to meet the individualized needs of each person who's using it, right? So we think about different students that we've encountered in our classrooms, right? Some students may not be able to use a mouse, right? So accessible technology for them would mean that the tool can be used with a keyboard. Some students may need screen readers. Some students may need captions or audio support, right? So again, it's how the tool is designed so that everybody who's using it can use it in the way that it was intended, right? So I think accessibility is a different word than say accommodation in a technical stance, right? So when we talk about technology tools, when we talk about accessibility, we mean that it's usable in the way that it was intended versus how we can allow people to have minimal access to that tool. So why do we have to do this? For no other reason than it's the law, right? We are required as public schools to do this through the various laws that have been passed through the Americans with Disabilities Act, through the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and through the IDEA legislation. We are required by law to provide accessible design and accessible content to students. That's why we have to have Braille textbooks, read aloud services, things like that. This applies in a technical context too. And Jenna, that's fantastic. As a former EC teacher, you became an IDF. I would love to pick your brain at some point about some of the things that you've experienced. But also it's the right thing to do, right? It is our moral imperative as educators to create content that all students can access, and to use materials in our classrooms that don't differentiate between one student, or differentiate is the wrong word in this context, that don't discriminate from one student to the other, right? That all students are able to use the content that we have. So accessibility is more than just captioning a video or putting an alt tag on an image. It's not a compliance exercise, right? You don't do accessibility to check a box and say you've done it. It is about making your content available to all. It's not optional. Again, there are legal requirements to making content accessible, and it's not for some individuals, right? Accessibility is about providing everybody what they need to access a tool. So when we talk about universal design, it's transferring accessibility into universal design, right? So if accessible design is our minimum legal requirement for design, then universal design is the application of those accessible tools to create a learning experience for all of our students. So when we think about universal design is about removing barriers, creating equitable learning experiences, about providing high quality learning experiences for everybody, and providing all of the students with the supports that they need. So I want to start digging into the UDL guidelines to understand them, and then we can go into how to actually operationalize this in your content. And I'm going to go ahead and pop this link in the chat also so you have it. And if you want to follow along, and the captions will disappear as I switch tabs, so I apologize for that. And if you need additional support, I'll try to highlight as I go. And just let us know in the chat, and we can post notes in the chat as we go. So if you think about a good example, Alex used the ramp example before. Another example is captions, right? So if you think about captions on a video or captions on this video, right? There are people who need the captions because they can't hear, right? There are also people who need the captions because they may miss a word, right? Back 2 months ago in the olden times, we used to go to restaurants and gyms. And at that point, right, the captions on the TVs were there in those contexts to help us because we were engaging with those materials differently, right? We were engaging with a TV, a sports game, different at a restaurant than we would do it at our home. So we needed the captions to engage with that material in that environment, which is a distinction, right? Like at home, a TV with audio might be fine for most people, but at a restaurant where it's loud, we need the captions. So that accommodation that we use for accessibility serves different purposes for different people, but also in different contexts. And that's a key element of universal design is that it's contextual as well as need-based. So if we think about universal design is based in 3 areas based on brain science. So it provides multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and then multiple means for student expression. So if we think about what that means is in terms of engagement, right, we think about, and all of these in this website are all clickable. So if we think about one of the things for recruiting interest for engagement is about optimizing individual choice and autonomy. So if we click that on the website, there's a long definition about what that means. So it means providing learners autonomy by providing choices in the level of perceived challenges, in the type of rewards or recognition available, the context or content used for assessment, the tools, the color, design. So that may mean that a PowerPoint may work for some, but some students may want to do a paper versus a video versus some other means of creative expression, right? That it's about that UDL is about providing that choice based on students' strengths and needs. If we look at representation, offering ways of customizing the display of information such that, right, this is about how information is displayed for students, right? Things like having contrasting backgrounds and foregrounds so that students maybe who are colorblind can tell the difference between a background and foreground, but also that's helpful for students with autism to not have brightly colored backgrounds. Having size of text and images be big enough for people to use, using color, but also symbology for emphasis, right? So sometimes for emphasis, especially in web design, you may put something in red because it's important or bold because it's important. But how can you add some symbology to that for students who may not catch that distinction, such as an icon with like an exclamation point saying something's important, or step numbers, so that students not only are using color, but there's some symbology there to help them as well. Again, the volume and speech rate, speed and timing, layouts, fonts, all of those things. And then you think about physical action and expression. So for expression and communication, things like using multiple types of media, using multiple different tools, building graduated levels of support for students. So the link for this, again, I'm going to drop this in the chat one more time so people have it. But I would encourage you to read over these guidelines and think about, in particular, how the work you're doing in remote learning, but also when we get back to school, how we are using universal design principles in our learning and in our instructional content to make sure that they're accessible to all students. So when we think about designing for accessibility and for universal design, I like these infographics created by the UK Accessibility Office about how to design content. This is thinking about how we're designing content on our worksheets, in our LMS, on documents that we're creating. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this link in the chat and walk through it as well. So if you think about, for example, let's scroll down here, for users on the autistic spectrum. So they've got, again, multiple means of representation. They have it as a bulleted list, and they also have it available as an infographic. So for users on the autistic spectrum, using simple colors, writing in plain English, using simple sentences and bullets, not using figures of speech and idioms, not creating these big walls of text. Thinking about for users who have physical and motor disabilities, making sure your tap targets are large enough that you have big clickable buttons on your websites. Giving space between fields, testing to make sure that a site can only be used by keyboard. Designing with a touch screen in mind, right? For students, especially younger kids with fine motor control who have difficulty with a mouse, making sure that keyboard navigation is there. For users who are dyslexic or who are deaf or hard of hearing. So again, in the interest of time, we're going to move on, but I would encourage you, again, this link is in the chat, to bookmark this and use it as a checklist as you go through and design instruction.
And Mark, if I could just chime in for one quick second, one thing that just strikes me with this work is that not only is it a legal requirement, not only is it the right thing to do, but it also just makes your design better. Like adhering to these guidelines actually makes the work better. So it really hits it in all three places.
Yes, totally. Yes, right. Accessible design is good design in general, right? So the URL showing page not found, I'm going to pop it in again to make sure. You may have to cut and paste it. And I'll ask Alex if he can monitor the chat and make sure if you have difficulty, he can help you out. So here's some general design tips. So again, testing sites before you have students using them, testing sites for keyboard accessibility and making sure you should be able to, on a well-designed accessible website, you should be able to use the tab and the enter keys to move between all of the elements on the page and then use the enter keys to select them. Using semantic styling, and I'll talk about that in Word in a minute. But what that means is not making a header bold, but actually flagging it as a header, right? So that screen readers and students can look at it and see that it's a header. Ensuring accurate captioning, relevant background noise should be captioned as well. Using meaningful hyperlink text. So I know sometimes it's tempting to say click here and make that your hyperlink text in a hyperdoc or in a web page. But the problem with that is that A, it's not usually a big enough tap target for a user to click on if they need help. But the other thing is screen readers will read the list of links from a page. So when that happens, if your link is click here, if that's all it is, it doesn't make sense out of context. So when the screen reader reads it, it'll just be click here, click here, click here, click here, click here, right? So your links on your web pages and in your documents should provide meaningful information about what's in those links. Using table headers, and I'll show you how to do that in Google Docs in a minute. Putting alt texts on your images, and then not putting text in images, right? So I know sometimes on social media, especially, we'll do a document and then take a screenshot. But if you need a translator or a screen reader, it can't read the text in that image. And then being thoughtful about color use. So we're going to go through and I'm going to show you both Google Docs and Word, Office 365, how to do some accessible design. Google Docs is good, but actually Office 365 has a lot of really cool features as well. In some cases, they're actually better. So I'm going to walk through both of those and show you how to do some of those accessible design elements in your Google Docs. So I have here a Google Doc, and up here next to the font is the styling, is the style. And when I talk about semantic styling, this is what I mean, is about instead of taking a header and just highlighting the text and making it bold, right? You may know that's a header visually, but somebody who's using some type of adaptive device, or you'll notice Google Docs has this accessibility menu. And if you go from headings, there are actually keyboard shortcuts to move between headings in your document. So if a heading is not flagged as a heading, Google Docs doesn't know how to do that. So instead of just highlighting your text and making it bold, you can actually make this a header by typing your text, clicking on this menu, and then picking whether it's a level 1, level 2, level 3, or level 4 header. If you don't like the styling that it uses by default, you can always change it by formatting it the way you like it and then coming back here and saying update heading 2 to match. The other thing that I like about that is that it also changes all of your heading 2s throughout your document. So if you decide halfway through that you want them red for some reason, then all you have to do is make that change to your heading 2 in one place, and it'll change it throughout your document. And also, Word and Google Docs both use those headings to add your table of contents. So if you do insert and table of contents, it will use those built-in headings in order to generate your table of contents. Now, if you've got an image, if you right click on the image, you'll see this thing here for alt text. For alt text, there's a title and a description. So your alt text is what a screen reader will read if it can't display the image. And the purpose of an alt text is not to describe the image, it's to describe the takeaway of the image, right? So you could say, this is a cityscape, right? But that doesn't actually tell the user what they're supposed to get from this, right? So you would say, this is a cityscape of a rural northeastern North Carolina town. There are no cars in the parking lots, right? If the purpose is to show that this is an empty street, right? You want to make sure that you get the purpose of the image and not just what the image is. So the example that I always go back to is the water cycle, right? Putting an image up of the water cycle and then having an alt text caption that says the water cycle doesn't actually help anybody understand what they're seeing, what they're missing in lieu of that image, right? So you have to, and I'm gonna mess up my 5th grade science here, right? So in the description of the water cycle in that alt text, you don't want to just say the water cycle, you want to say it rains and the water evaporates and becomes a cloud and then it rains again, right? So you need to actually put what students are going to get from that image and not just what the image is. So the last thing I want to show you here is a tool called Grackle Docs. And Grackle Docs, and Alex, if you can put a link to Grackle Docs in the chat for me. Grackle Docs is an add-on to Google Docs. And what it is it's an accessibility checker for Google Docs. So within Grackle, so in the add-ons menu, if you launch Grackle Docs, what it will do is it will check the document for you and flag all of your accessibility issues, right? So I didn't put an alt text on that image and it flags it for me. And the thing that I like that I like about Grackle Docs is when you click on it, it will tell you what the image is. And then if you click on the error, it will take you to the screen where you can correct it. So you can correct all of the accessibility issues in your document from this one tab. So to get to that, Alex put the link on the chat. You have to install it in your Google Docs in the add-ons. And then you'll go to the add-ons menu and go to Grackle Docs and then launch. Grackle Docs is free for schools right now. They've released it for free. I think there's like a lot of tools, there's a free tier and a paid tier, but I've been able to do most of what I need to do with the free tier. So you'll see that there. The other thing here is this accessibility menu. The accessibility menu lets you do a bunch of different things like move through the document, and you'll notice next to each of the commands that let you move through the document, there's a keyboard shortcut that students can remember to go through the document. The other thing that I love is there's this show live edits button, which will show you live in real time what's being changed in your document. You may have to enable that by going to the tools menu and going to accessibility settings and turning on screen reader support. The other thing with screen reader support is if you highlight, and this is not going to work for me on the webinar, but if you highlight text, you can go to the accessibility menu and it will read it out loud back to you. The last thing I want to show you in Google Docs is, so we've talked about accessible design, but we haven't talked about how students can accessibly use Google Docs. So for a student who may have difficulty using a keyboard, Google Docs does have a voice typing option. And the way you get to that, you have to be using Chrome. But the way you get to that is under the tools menu and go to voice typing. It'll pop up with this microphone here. And once you click on the microphone, comma, Google Docs will automatically type what it hears you say. Period, new paragraph. You can also do formatting through it, period. Or you can just type and go back and format later. It's up to you. And again, the way I got to that was tools and voice typing. So that's some of the accessibility features in Google Docs. I want to go ahead and do the same thing with Microsoft 365. Will voice typing make corrections? It gets it reasonably well. It does have issues with accents, and it does have issues for some students, but it'll do reasonably well. It tries to do a best guess. It's not 100% by any means. So here's another document. Here I'm switching over now from Google Docs to Word 365. So I know some districts use Google Docs, some use Word. So this is basically the same document. For semantic styling in Office 365, if you highlight text, you'll get this pop-up menu, and there's still a styles button, just like in Google Docs, where you can do your semantic styling. Up on top of Google Doc, up here, there is this dictate button, same as in Google Docs, where you are able to dictate to Microsoft Word by speaking. Word also has, on the review panel, Word also has an accessibility checker where it will check your document the same as Grackle Docs. It's actually built in. You don't need any special add-ons. Word also has this cool editor that does some things like give you a readability score, which is a norm referenced tool based on a score higher than 60 indicates short words and sentences. Most people find it easy to read that kind of writing. So it will give you the readability score, the number of distinct words, the time to read, time to speak, and give you some suggestions about your writing. The last thing in Word is here under the View menu, there's what's called the Immersive Reader. And this is one of my favorite features of Office 365. And they're making it available to other tools as well. So if you click on a word, you can hear it said out loud. But there are other options here, like I can highlight a paragraph and it will read it.
For 67 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new.
But also up here under the preferences, you can pick the size of your text, the spacing between the lines, and you can move from light to dark contrast. Under grammar options, it will let you break apart words by syllables. So if you have issues and you want to break words by syllables, it will also highlight parts of speech for you in different colors. The other thing that's cool is you can have this picture dictionary. So for example, like this word here, men, right? So it pops up with a picture and the word that you can see. But also, the last thing on that feature is this line focus, where you can have it show a couple of lines at a time for students, and they can use their arrow key to move down. So you can have it actually, it will show a couple of lines and blur out the rest of the text for them. And again, this is all built into Word, and I got to that under the View menu and then Immersive Reader. So these are a couple of other tools that you can use before we move on to other things. So the Wave plugin will let you check accessibility on a website. So they're for 365. They're being rolled out in the other Word versions on desktops as well. If you're using Windows desktops, they should actually be in Office 2019. Not all of the features are, but they're being rolled out gradually. The Wave plugin lets you check websites for accessibility. And yes, it does work on other Office programs as well. Otter.ai is a transcription app that will let you do voice to text. Microsoft Learning Tools are tools that I just showed you, and they are again being rolled out to other platforms as well. There should be a plugin for Google Docs. There are some third-party ones now, but Microsoft is actually working on bringing these tools to Google Docs as well. and then some equation editors that you'll be able to access from the slide deck that will show you some accessible tools for equations. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex now, who's going to talk about social and emotional needs for students and how we support students' social and emotional needs. I'm going to ask Alex to take over screen sharing and make sure his captions are on, and go from there. Alex, you're muted.
I should be unmuted. My video should be showing. The caption should be showing. I think we're good to go. That was, the first time that I saw Mark demonstrate that, which was fairly recently. I was absolutely amazed by the capability and just the ways, the flexibility and the depth of which you can go into in terms of how you present something and how you again, with struggling readers. It's truly amazing. So thank you, Mark, for sharing all this. And once again, wanted to reemphasize that all of these slides are going to be available for you afterwards, the resources, the presentation itself. So don't feel compelled certainly to have to, scrape everything down right away. I wanted to touch, we're going to move to talk about social and emotional learning needs. In the context of students who have learning challenges. I think because they're so prevalent these days in social and emotional learning, both as for us as educators, for us as human beings, and to support our students in building those skills. This is obviously an extremely challenging, unprecedented time. So our students really do need that level of support. And so I'm going to talk about it a little bit. And one thing I always love to start off with is there's this quote from, it's a report came out beginning of last year called From a Nation at Risk to a Nation at Hope. It's from an organization called CASEL. They're really the leading organization around promoting social and emotional learning in schools. And we use their framework, their way of thinking about social and emotional learning, when we do all of our work around it. So we have an online course that a free online course that digs into the framework itself, and a whole host of other resources where we partnered with them. But the idea here is that the promotion of social emotional learning, it's not like this shifting educational fad. It has been around in one form or another before John Dewey. This is nothing new, but we're starting to see research and support that shows that this can have real impacts both on academics, but more importantly, have lifelong and life-wide impacts. So it's the substance of education itself. It's not this little distraction that we do for a few minutes of a day, just to check a box. But it's, when we get to the real work, quote unquote, of math and English and other core areas, but it's how that instruction can succeed. I mean, when you think about something like stress, we've all experienced stress, certainly at this time, maybe more than other times. And is it easier or is it harder to learn when you're stressed? Well, it's harder to learn. So therefore, any one of us can at least intuitively see through our experience the extent to which social and emotional challenges can impact learning. So I always like to kind of start there. And then, but now we're shifting to like, okay, these skills are hard enough to build in the face-to-face context, but how do we build them at distance? And how do we support all of our students, particularly those with learning challenges, who are statistically more likely to have some social and emotional challenges? So what are some things that we can do to help build their self-awareness, their social awareness, their relationship skills, responsible decision-making, and those self-management skills that are so essential? And so some of it's a mindset. I would argue a good chunk of it's a mindset, is right now really valuing that social and emotional needs over the academic. We've heard for recently, certainly it's a theme in education, which I think is accurately reflected in the reality of kids and parents' lives, is this notion of Maslow before Bloom, that you look at all these core needs, the physiological, safety, belongingness, esteem, all these fundamental foundational needs as humans. We need those before we can start to quit talking to our kids about higher order thinking skills, right? So I think that to me is something that, again, it's a theme that you'll see the hashtag Maslow before Bloom, but it's never been more prevalent, at least in my experience in education, than it is right now. And that's not to say that you throw out the higher order thinking. It's just to say that these are the foundational things that without them in place, there's not going to be any. The kids aren't going to have the capacity to generate any sort of higher order thinking. So I think that's something that is incredibly important for us as we think about social and emotional learning. And so when you think about students with learning differences, and you think about how do you support them, how do I identify and support them with SEL needs over this distance, we think that And this stems from the beginnings of our work around learning differences, but it's really, really heightened here, is the idea of focusing on student strengths. Really, really focusing on student strengths. I can give you a very concrete example that for Earth Day, my daughter made a project, and she loves to sing. She loves to sing more than anything. And so the project she ended up making was she created an Earth Day song. She shared it with her class. It ended up being shared by the PTA, and she felt really, really good about it. She joked about, hey, Daddy, now it's out in the world. But that was her strength. So she used her strength of understanding music and loving it to be able to show what she knows about the earth. And it was really, really cool. And I think that idea of really leveraging and focusing on your students' strengths to address their challenges, not just having like a laser-like focus on their challenges. That's something I think that is heightened even more. And there'll be a link to this activity in the notes. I'm not going to play the video right now. It's just a little bit fast. I don't know that it lends itself particularly well to this context, but it's called the strengths chain. And there are instructions in a printout. You'll be able to use it with your kids. But the long and short is that there are a bunch of areas, a bunch of topics under which we have strengths. And you cut out a few of those, whichever ones you identify, let's say 5 of your strengths, your students do, and they create a link. And then each day, as they're able to demonstrate a strength, they add to that link. And we've actually, in my house, I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. And what we do in our house is we have one of these links that we've established, and then each child gets to add to that. Like they can actually nominate the other kid for doing something particularly well, demonstrating the strength in a certain way. And we add a link. So we want that link, that chain link to grow. So that's something, again, that we really want to focus in on the student strengths and leveraging those, because also by doing that, you're building student agency, making them feel like they have more control over their learning, that they can do it. You're building esteem, you're building all these sorts of things that are really helpful in this environment where it's just by its very nature out of our control as educators more than it would be otherwise. So we found the student chain activity to be really, really effective. And I also wanted to point to these key resources. One is an SEL implementation brochure that DPI, our partners at DPI put together, that is chock full of wonderful resources. Definitely encourage you to dig into it, to see all the resources they've put together. They're practical, they're useful, and they're applicable. So certainly dig into that. We have our social and emotional learning course that's going on right now. It is a free online course that is, we extended our registration for about 4 months. So it was originally going to end, the registration was going to end in April, and now the registration is open into August. So you can get 2.5 CUs for completing the requirements for that course. Which are stuff like, fulfilling discussion board contributions, building an action plan, and other odds and ends. But we've had some great participation. We have 7,500 people plus from all 50 states and over 80 countries. It's truly a global community. We're really proud of it. CASEL, I spoke to before about that leading organization around promoting social and emotional learning in schools. Their website is just chock full of incredibly practical, useful resources. And they have a section also on promoting SEL at a distance. And finally, this what we're talking about now, bulked up for an hour version of it. We have links to the SEL sessions that Brittany Miller and I conducted, where you can get this at a much more depth. That's less framed around learning differences like this, and it is framed more broadly around supporting SEL in your students right now, especially again in this wild time that we're living in. So that's the big picture about some of our SEL work, and encourage you when you get those slides to go through some of those resources, review the presentation that Brittany and I had. And you'll be able to get even more resources from that. But we didn't feel we could possibly do this justice without talking about our pursuit of equity in the process. And how do we make sure that all of our students, particularly those with learning challenges, with learning differences, get what they need during this time, right? And that we aren't seeing some of these divides extend and become exacerbated. How are we not accelerating these divides? Because we're starting to see some of that. We're starting to see that some of our most vulnerable students are those who, especially with learning challenges, are those who have run the risk of being left behind. A tweet from, and I bring this up because resonates with educators so significantly. And every time I've shown it, I screen grabbed this close, not a month ago, but about probably mid-April. And so typically, if you know, tweets from superintendents, this is Scott Elliott and Mataga, they generally don't get 6,000 likes and 692 retweets. And I assume if one of you looked up this tweet, I bet you it's got a heck of a lot more now than it did then. But he says to all the public school haters, social media stars, staff, self-promoters, and critical friends, we appreciate all the advice about re-envisioning education. Right now, we're busy loving on our students and feeding the community. We'll catch back up with you in the fall. So that is something that I think is a sentiment that really, really has resonated. And it speaks to the idea of we need, first and foremost, to care about our kids' well-being and to support them to develop the skills through which they can care for their own well-being. And so I'm certainly not going to read all of these, but I definitely want to point to a few of just the realities that your students that are experiencing. And again, those who have learning differences are statistically more likely to experience some of these. Just having, we have 26 million people plus have recently lost their jobs. So it's very likely that you have multiple students with parents or guardians who have lost their jobs. And not only the economic distress that comes with that, but the emotional distress as well. Having a family just trying to share all of one device. Having parents and guardians who don't speak English. You imagine you have students who are caring for the younger siblings when their parents are unavailable, so they can't really do any of the work themselves. Being in a house that is experiencing domestic abuse, being in a home that is experiencing where one or more of the guardians are experiencing mental illness at the time. Having no internet access at all, having the device but not having the adult around to support them. I can think of a very specific example where my daughter was asked to go to a Google Meet last week, and she was having trouble logging in. And because I knew the tool, because I was around, I was privileged enough to be here working and around to help her, I was able to figure out what the login issue was. But that doesn't apply to every kid out there. So it's really something to think about. It's something to just recognize that a lot of students are really behind multiple 8 balls right now, and it's really hard to design broad. We would all love to have the AR iPhone, the iPhone 11 Max AR activity that we're giving to all our kids, but that's going to leave a heck of a lot of them behind if we were to do that. And so again, thinking about this, I want to get you thinking about how do these circumstances have a compounding impact on those with learning differences, right? And so I just wanted to give you 3 suggestions that are no tech, that focus on learning differences, helping support your students with learning difference, and bring in SEL skills at the same time. One of them can be meditation. So you're connecting it here with SEL. You're building self-management and self-awareness. So you can have fancy meditation apps if you want. In fact, Headspace, the app Headspace, is free for educators. So I would recommend taking a look at that. And Mark, if you could drop a link to Headspace in the chat, that would be great. But without any apps, you can ask your students to find a quiet place for 5 or 10 minutes to set a timer, focus on their breathing, focus on what they're hearing, their breathing, and remind them to gently come back to those thoughts once they start to wander, because our brains wander. So that's how it works, right? Our brains wander, and it's okay just to come back gently. Don't get upset at yourself for wandering, because this whole idea is that you're aware of what's going on right now, non-judgmentally. So that's something, again, you can have a fancy tool for it, you cannot. Having students cook is another possibility. We've seen some really interesting, cool ideas where, and this again supports student self-management and their relationship skills of cooking with someone else, like a sibling or a parent. Students might know a recipe that they want to cook. Imagine there contains 5 ingredients, right? They can cook without looking. They cook the recipe without looking at it. But they create these 3 tricks. Which the key is you ask your students to create 3 tricks to support their own working memory as they cook the recipe. So in the kind of that backdoor teaching here is that the process for the students creating those tricks for themselves, those reminders, whatever it is, that fosters and builds their working memory. That supports their working memory. So that's a way to do it. It's not just them cooking, it's them creating these sort of quick tricks that they can use, specialized to them, to enable them to complete the recipe. And again, that's going to build the working memory. And finally, there's this activity from that you might have heard of it. It's actually not wildly dissimilar from the strengths activity. It's called Don't Break the Chain, which is more about habit formation. So you imagine something that you want to do and you have a larger goal. Let's say each day of the week, I want to make sure that I accomplish my reading by 11 o'clock. And each day that I do it, I add a link to a chain. And I have to keep that chain going or else the chain's going to break. So it's this idea, and then you start to see this progress of this chain getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it's very tangibly rewarding for students to see this chain getting bigger because it's a result of their habit formation. So again, that supports their executive function. It also supports stuff like their self-management, like their responsible decision-making by choosing to engage in that activity, but something else. So that's another no-tech. You can take all of these three and make them really fancy and tech-based, and that's completely fine. But you also, if you know of an environment, if you know of a context that they don't have the access to either the devices, to the internet, they can still do these tools. They can still do these exercises in that way. So I'm going to pass it back over to Mark, and he's going to just take us home and wrap us up. And we really want to emphasize how much we appreciate you taking, again, this busy hour out of your day to spend with us.
All right, so I just want to summarize the 3 points that from our session today, which is universal design supports all learners, and it's the right direction for creating equitable learning opportunities for our students. That we need to value social and emotional needs over academic needs as they're foundational, especially in the times we're in right now. And then we must relentlessly pursue equity as best we can to create equitable experiences for all of our students. So again, and we're going to put all of these links in the chat, everything we've talked about today, as well as all of our past and future sessions, the slide decks, recordings, everything is available at this website, go.ncsu.edu/remote learning. And Alex is going to put that in the chat. Also, there is a website that the Department of Public Instruction has put together that Alex is also going to put in the chat. And again, we'll be putting all of these links in the chat multiple times so you can bookmark them. This is about a site that DPI has put together on remote learning. Alex, you're just sending to me privately. You need to send to everybody. This is a site that DPI has put together on remote learning.
Mark, they're so valuable. I think everyone, including you, could.
It's a really, really good site. So coaching support, you'll be receiving an email follow-up with instructions for coaching support that DPI is doing. And last but not least, so second to last, is our SEL course that Alex mentioned is available, and you can sign up for that. We'll be putting a link in there also. And now, last but not least, is the thing you probably care most about, which is how you get credit for this. And so we have this survey. Note that the R, the L, and the D are capital, and it is case sensitive. So we are going to post that. You have 3 days to take the survey, and sometimes the survey does get overloaded, so you may have to wait and come back to it. But here's the survey link. You have 3 days to do this, and then you will get an email with a certificate. They're backed up with certificates. So right now we have one person who's processing certificates and checking attendance in the sessions. So because that's done by a person, it may be a few days before you get your certificate, but you do need to go ahead and do your survey in order to get a certificate. So on that note, thank you all for being here today. Thank you for your time. Hopefully everybody got something useful out of this. And again, we'll post the links in the chat. We'll stick around for a few minutes if you have issues accessing the links. And hope you all have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.